Morning, everyone. I'm Russell Rucker. I'm here for another constitutional talk. And before we get started, I'd just like to ask you to subscribe. So hit that subscribe button for me. And just to be sure that you still see the rest of my videos. Today, I'd like to talk about Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine was an author of pamphlets. He wrote Common Sense, which was really his classic. He wrote Rights of Man, which dealt with the French Revolution. There were quite a different number of things that he wrote about. But first, I'd like to talk about his life a little bit. He was born in England. When he finished school, he got married. His wife died in childbirth, and he got remarried, and his second wife divorced him. He had a job to collect taxes, and he was fired from that position. He really just couldn't seem to make any money. But what he did make was he made friends with Benjamin Franklin. See, Franklin was over in Europe as a diplomat, and he had written some things that were kind of disparaging against the King of England, and he fled to France, and they tried him in abstention while he was in France. Benjamin Franklin told him that you should try America. He gave him a letter of recommendation, and he went to America, and he went to Philadelphia. And he ran a magazine. It was called the Philadelphia Magazine, I believe. He wrote articles in there that were anti-slavery, for instance. And this was not a political rag. He wrote The Plain Truth, which one of the other founders that he met, Ben Franklin, introduced him to a number of these radicals. And he was a radical. But one of the founders suggested not to use the word plain truth, but to use common sense. And that's what he published. He published a pamphlet called Common Sense, and in it he discusses the settling of America. He discusses the problems with a king, that a king needs to be looked after, that a king is not a godly way to run things, that our king should be God, not a human king set up. He discusses the flaws with the current king, discusses the flaws with monarchy, goes all the way back to biblical times, and discusses why we didn't need a king in the beginning and why we don't need one now. Then he goes on discussing the island that rules over America. Because remember, we were just colonies at the time. But our colonies were larger than England. And he discusses that and the cost of running such a large area of land. Because it wasn't just our colonies. I mean, they had colonies in Canada. They controlled India, parts of Australia. I mean, they were really literally all over the world. You know, the sun never sets on the British Empire, it was said. So he discusses the cost of that empire, of ruling the seas, and the cost of ships. And he brings up the different countries in the world that need raw materials to make these ships. And they had to import from here or there, virtually all of them, except us. We had enough strong timber, and we had enough of the right kinds of timber to build what we needed. We had cotton being grown. We could get make sails. They could make the stays in for the sales. So he was pointing out the cost, and he had it all the way down to the cost of each ship and what it would cost, so we could patrol our own shores without the need of another country. And then he continues on talking about this. This is really the right time for independence. Common Sense came out in January of 1776. And the whole objective of Common Sense was convince the rest of the colonials that now was the time that we should declare independence. The initial run sold 150,000 copies, and through the course of the Revolutionary period, he sold 500,000. There were as many copies of Common Sense as there were the Bible. So it really was a big deal. Later, he wrote The Rights of Man, which was a defense of the French Revolution. And during that time, it was pretty controversial to defend that, because there were just as many people for France as independence as there were on the English side of not wanting the independence there, and the way they went about it with the guillotine and all that. So there, it was quite divisive. Okay, now next week, I'm going to talk about Declaration of Independence, and I'm reading an original copy. Now, what's interesting about this original copy is it's questionable who wrote it. There was an original copy with the letters TP on it, and it's thought that Thomas Paine may have written it, that Jefferson took it and used it as a kind of a template or whatever to write up what he was going to write up. It's quite different, but then again, it's not quite as different. There was a New Jersey newspaper that threatened Jefferson to reveal the true writer of Declaration of Independence. Now, I'm not here to say Thomas Paine wrote it or not, and I'm not here to disparage Jefferson, but it is an interesting off-ramp to what we've always been taught. The thing is, the fingerprints on the Declaration of Independence, the way it's written, is the way Paine would write. See, when Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, The Rights of Man, and all these other things in the newspapers, he didn't use a name. He just printed them and sold them. So he never took credit for his work. And the way in the Declaration of Independence, the way it is written, one after the other, to build an overwhelming argument, that was his style. In fact, you can't read Common Sense without coming to the conclusion that he was right, that this was the best time. We needed to get rid of the king. He was a tyrant, and that we could actually fend for ourselves. And so a lot of the things that are discussed in that original version, for instance, in the 19th and 20th complaints about the king, it talks about slavery. Well, he had written some pretty anti-slavery things in the Philadelphia Magazine. So you really gotta wonder with yourself, if it was the work of Thomas Paine. And he talks about the Scottish troops, something else that Jefferson wouldn't have talked, and it didn't make the light of day. None of this stuff made the light of day. It was all taken out. Jefferson was working on the Declaration of Independence with a group of men that were appointed to do so, a committee from the Continental Congress. And they entailed Livingston and Adams, Franklin. There were 5 of them. So it took all 5 to actually write the document that I'm talking about. But I just want you to have an idea when you hear that next week of Thomas Paine and his ideas, because it's all part of the story of our independence. Even if he didn't write a word of it, he still wrote Common Sense, and he put in motion an idea where people's minds would be completely changed to accept independence. And that in and of itself is important to the story of our independence, which is our nation's birthday. And I know next week we'll be celebrating it. And I wish you a good day. I'll talk to you later. See you on the next Constitutional Talk. Thank you.